This is part 2 of WaterBear predicts the future of the music industry. And the question we're asking today is, are we witnessing the death of the album format? So certainly the album format seems to be under a lot of pressure, with a lot of us kind of questioning whether it's actually worth making an album at all. And the problems, of course, are that they're relatively expensive to make, and especially when you start getting into people doing a proper mix and the mastering, it all clocks up, and it's time consuming as well. And bands can get into a lot of trouble here because they're chewing up a lot of time making an album, and also it dilutes the artistic content a little bit. So whereas you've got a choice of focusing all your efforts onto one track and making the video and the track being the best it possibly can be, that's obviously going to have to be diluted over 10 or 12 tracks. And that's going to be expensive as well, so that puts you under all kinds of pressure. And the problem is, once you've finished your album, you have to think about all the videos and the distribution and getting it out there. And a lot of time, that's the last thing bands have thought of. So they've made this great record, and then they're like, well, now what? And then they put it out into empty space, or even worse, they pay a PR company hoping that they'll suddenly generate them press. There is no story there. A band releases new record is not a story. So however much you pay for your press, unless there's something underlying it, some good reason to write about it or listen to this record, there's a massive danger that it just becomes an old record within a couple of days. So you put your album out and you've only got one chance to make a debut album, and it's gone. And the album's out, a week later it's just another old failed release in a big pile of failed releases historically. And at that point your band is no longer fresh and new as well, so you've sort of made it a lot harder for yourself to sort of dig yourself out from that point. It's not a disaster. Bands do it. Bands often have 3-4 albums before one kind of bites, you know. So it's not a disaster. If that's you, don't freak out. It's not a disaster by any means. But if you haven't released your debut album yet, or haven't recorded it, better still, let's pause and think for a minute. So the album format has a big hold on our psyche. It's kind of built into our DNA, especially people my age. And I think there's two reasons for it. There's the obvious reason that albums evolved to be a particular length because that was the amount of music and sonic information you could fit on a vinyl record. So roughly speaking, it was 25 minutes a side. If you put on more information than that, more tracks, the sound quality was degraded pretty quickly. And it kind of has become to feel like the right amount of music from a particular band that you like. The double album never really caught on in big numbers. It was always a specialist thing. A lot more EPs are made than listened to because it's a bit of a fiddle to be sort of, you know, historically putting an EP on, then taking it off the turntable or a CD, or now even embedded 4 tracks into a playlist feels a bit weird. So, you know, EPs are often made because it's convenient, but they're not very often listened to, so that's a bit of an issue. So for whatever reason, we've come to sort of feel that an album that is a sort of definitive statement for a band, and it's a bit like getting a book to read on holiday. You expect it to be a certain length, and that goes back decades and decades. So we're not shaking that off too easily, or, you know, it's part of our cultural understanding of what music is. And I think there's another point here, which is, in the old days, a band had to establish themselves by going out and touring. So it's not coincidence that the length of one album, a traditional 10-12 track album, just about does the job for your first ever headline shows. It's roughly an hour. Throw in a cover to show people what you're all about, where you come from and where you're going. With your first album, you've got a headline set. The trouble is now, that kind of goes out the window because touring at that level to establish yourself is fiercely expensive, and a lot of bands doom themselves by trying to do it in that traditional way. So could this be the question, that now we don't have to tour initially, now that smart bands are building up a digital following first and then going on tour when there's an audience to play to, do we need an album at all? Do we actually have to make that first album, or would our time and money be better spent doing other things? Would it be smarter just to concentrate on one song and make that the best that it possibly can be? Because think of the huge pile of new music that's coming out there. So rather than flood it with 12 tracks on an album, concentrate all your creative efforts and all your quality control on making one track absolutely mind-blowing and getting a great video together. Now you may be putting a full set list together in the background. That'd be really important, I'm sure, and you may have an album in your mind, but is it not a better strategy to release one song at a time and build up a profile, build up an audience, and then possibly even start a crowdfunding campaign to put it all together and maximize it all, and then release a debut album later, even 2 years later? Remember my point, you only get one chance to release a debut album. And at that point, if you're releasing it there further down the line, you've probably got a story going. You've built your audience, you're probably picking up some supports, you may even be on the beginnings of the festival circuit, and there's a story, there's a pledge following, there's more money coming in to make your album and then do a better job on the mix and all that kind of stuff. And when you release it, people will actually buy it and it will count for something. And at that point, you are well and truly on your way, because you've just played your cards a little bit smarter than the other bands. Food for thought. So if we're thinking about releasing one song at a time, I think it's worth learning the value of patience, because in bands, I've been so guilty of this myself, always in a rush to show the world what you can do, push that album out, you know, get out there. Actually, there's no time limit anymore on your career in music. Sometimes the right thing to do is nothing. Sometimes the right thing to do is less, but make it absolutely brilliant. So as well as the songwriting, that goes for every other part, the video and the release around the video, the way you run your social media. Now the great news here is everybody's rushing out albums and EPs. Nobody is really, very few bands are really taking care of the songwriting standards. And this is one thing that's fundamentally changed since the late 80s, early 90s. Back then, there was a huge cultural acceptance of the fact you had to work very, very hard at your songwriting, and there was various gatekeepers. So it would be your A&R man, it would be radio, it would be the marketing department in the record company, it would be your manager. Everyone would be questioning you on lyrics in the songs, the title, the tempo. Have we got a hit here? And sometimes that was uber annoying, and sometimes bands found that very difficult creatively, but actually overall it did push the standards up. Now we haven't got access to great A&R people anymore, because no one's got the money to pay them, for one thing, and those skills are kind of, you know, they're hard to find, may even be something of the past. So you've got to impose high standards yourself on your songwriting. Try and work with people who've had a few hit records, for want of a better phrase, you know, people who've actually produced music that's sold well. Doesn't matter what age they are. Track down people who've had hits from previous decades and get their input on your songwriting. Don't be afraid of co-writing. Write the best song, singular, that you can, and make the best video. When it comes to video is, I've found to my cost, it's a very difficult medium. I don't have the ability to make videos myself. So I've noticed the huge difference there can be from a great idea on paper to the reality. Some bands make uber cool videos with an iPhone. Sometimes you can spend a lot of money and get a disappointing result. If you feel it's a bit cheesy, if you feel it's not right, don't brush those feelings under the carpet. Painful as it is, bury that video, do another one. Put it down to experience. Make sure the video is great and represents the band. And when you're happy with that video, you know, lyrics, subject matter, tempo, arrangement, great recording, great mix, great video, put that out and talk about the music. That's what bands can do. You know, what is the song about? Why should we care? What's interesting about it? And that's the beginnings of your story. So just to summarise where we're at the moment, I'm convinced the album format isn't dead. You know, it's too embedded in our DNA to ever go away. It's just a question of timing. The right time to do an album has changed. It used to be to launch a band. Now, debatable. I think that could be a bad idea. Better to consolidate the progress that you've made 18 months into a band project, something like that. Seems to make more sense to me. But I'll always be playing records, and actually I've seen a slight, I don't think it's a big deal, but there is a slight resurgence in the CD format as well. I noticed lots of people 18, 19, 20 buying CDs again. Vinyl, you know, people always buy CDs on merch stands as well because they want a physical souvenir. Vinyl's just a bit awkward. It's expensive and it's awkward to carry on the tube. They'll always be on the way home from the gig, you know. But a CD, you can buy it for a tenner. If you've got 10 quid at the end of the night left from a gig, you got the merch stand, you're going to come away with a CD and stick it in your bag. And that certainly happens in rock, maybe not so much in other forms of music, but people still selling more CDs than you think. And that in itself guarantees a future in the medium term for CDs. So they're not going anywhere. But let's look in a bit more detail at the actual timeline to putting out your debut album, whether it's a download, vinyl, memory stick, or CD, or whatever, or something I can't even think of. Okay, so let's put all this into a little bit of a sensible time frame. Got its echo in here. We're in the WaterBear building and we've started to fit out, so the ceilings are all open and the floor's got no carpets. And you can hear a bit of an echo. Anyway, so let's put all this plan into a time scale. So, whereas we'd often get a band together and 6 months later put out our first record, so this is day 0. So say this is 12 months, so that's 12 months. Let's have 24 months. Now, whereas we'd put a record out here normally, you know, in the old days, we'd put an album out there and then we'd tour it like here and try and establish the band in a year. You know, and that plan could conceivably still work, but the only trouble is it's expensive to record an album and you can be touring to no people and it's very hard to get any support slots or festivals because but your band's not big enough, so there's always going to be other people in front of you in the queue. So the suggestion is we maybe think about working really hard in this 3 to 6 months period and doing one song and a great video. And you've got a little bit, you plant your flag in social media land here, and then you develop it here. So at this 12-month point, you perhaps put out your second song. Now the regularity and the fine-tuning of this kind of format is up to you. But by the time you get your third song out, and all of these are great and they've all got great videos, never underestimate the power of everything to change just because this is great. If 20 people see it on Facebook and it's amazing, it will get shared and that'll become 200. If it's really great, that'll become, you know, quality still has its own momentum. And that's the bit that a lot of bands are missing. So, the second song, ideally, is even better than that, and you're starting to see a little bit of a story and a little bit of journey, and people are starting to get a buzz online at the moment. Maybe by this point you can start doing some warm-up shows, just to kind of get a live set together. And in the background, you are absolutely writing an album. The release date doesn't have to be set at all, but for the sake of argument, we're going to put it there. So maybe if there's enough quality, we can even have a couple of other releases. And at the point where there actually is an audience, you can start to pick up a few gigs. And when the album's out, perhaps you run a pledge campaign, so you can pay for a really good mix, some good artwork and all the rest of it, because you've actually got an audience. And at this point, you release your record and people actually care about it. So, you know my feeling, the album is not dead. It's just too ingrained in what we like about music for it to ever go away. It's just that maybe there's not a big rush to get the thing out. And it doesn't have to even be released there. Remember what I said, you only get one chance to make a debut album. So if it takes 5 years and it's great, that's much better than it coming out at 5 months and no one paying any attention to it. Mull it over, let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want this type of help and advice all the time, don't forget you can come to WaterBear to study a degree or a master's, depending on where you are on your journey. So check out the website if that's of interest. And of course, if we can help, we will.